So the topic of the panel is urban groundwater ecosystems as the challenge which is coming ahead in terms of urbanization and rapid sprawls that we have. And I like to start with a very small story. Some of you would have read that story, which I had written, and it became very popular on WhatsApp as well as Facebook, and it was published in Bhujal. And this is something to do with my own house. I have a house in the heart of the city. I live in Sadashupet, and my house is 130 years old. It's a fairly big property, so to say, as Sadashupet area comes. We have about 13,000 square feet of a vada. Those of you who are from Pune would know what's a vada. The property next to mine was also as big as that, and it was recently sold off. Recently, as in last year. And it doesn't bother us if somebody sells off the property next door to us. That's the usual way, right? But it did bother us immediately after 6 months, is because that piece of land, which was adjoining our piece of land, was also having a bungalow which was very much similar to ours. Now, the builder who bought that piece of land removed that bungalow and was going to construct an 8-story building there. And as you can imagine, if you have an 8-story building there, you need to go down 2.5 floors for parking and other things. And as soon as that digging work started, let me, one step before that. My house has a well, an open well, which is again 130 years old. This is my 5th generation in my house. Not a single person in my family has seen the bottom of the well. It is always full of water. Now, when this particular construction started happening, my well got empty in overnight, in one particular night. And we were shocked out of our wits. We had never experienced something, right? Punekars are not used to water shortages. We read about water shortages, but we don't experience them. We are very lucky and fortunate to have. So once this well got dried up, we were at our wits' end and we started figuring out what happened. And then, of course, I had to call Himanshu and then ask all the kind of questions. And then Himanshu said, no, it's not going to come back. If you're very, very fortunate, the water will come back, but that's some hope. So that started my actually line of thinking. And then I wanted to give this as a starting point because I have some questions around that concerning groundwater ecosystem. And I have an architect with me whom I would want to start my questions with. Right? Does the builder fraternity and the architect fraternity know enough about groundwater I'm asking a loaded question to him. So do we know enough about groundwater to be able to kind of conserve the groundwater ecosystem that we have?
Okay, thank you, Gurudas. To start with, I'm not an architect, but I'm a person who has dealt with more architects than architects usually do. I've dealt with a lot of builders who have dug a lot of ground, and all the statistics that Dr. Kulkarni has been throwing out about the aquifers being dug out, they have been done by my clients. I am completely sure that none of them are at all aware of the consequences of their digging down. If that was your question. Yeah. Coming out of an engineering college and spending a few years digging it myself, and then quitting it, and then after Sau Chuhe go to Hajj, I feel that there should be an input delivered to every engineer who comes out of college. He should get a finishing school sort of a thing. They should be told what there is beneath the ground, because even I know young geologists who are unsure of themselves when they talk about the subject. They have spent a good 4 years into their formal learning, and they still haven't learned it all. And the civil engineer is expected to know that a building next door, because they have seen plots as land parcels. What happens in your land has got nothing to do with mine. You look at your borders, and that's about it. So I think there is a huge disconnect, and this disconnect, if it can get sorted through, I don't know what, will help in a big way to reverse some of the damage that we have done. The water is not going to come back to your well, but maybe we can possibly stop some water going out of some other new wells.
Yeah. So I'll just kind of put in more thoughts into this mind. It's not just about my well being lost, but imagine, this Wada was about half an acre, and it went 2.5 stories deep. Now, if you calculate the volume of half an acre into the height which went down, we're going to permanently remove the storage capacity of that piece of volume of land, which means the rainwater which is going to fall on that particular piece of land is not going to sink in, but it's going to stay on the ground, and it's going to cause problems of flooding. So one is it's going to cause problems of groundwater depletion, and second, it's going to be flooding our neighborhood. So I want to go with this question. I would want to go to Ashwini, who's been working at PKC, and Pune Knowledge Center has been working with a lot of local administrative bodies as well as some government agencies. The question which comes to my mind is, when you work on any urban ecosystem, do you find that the question is similar to what I asked Ashutosh? Do you find that there is any amount of understanding between, let's say, the urban development, the building and construction, or the environment department, all of that within these administrative bodies?
I'll put a submission here that I'm not at all an expert of groundwater per se, like there are many people out in this room, but what we have been seeing in some of our very recent journey of Pune Knowledge Cluster, which just inceptualized about 2.5 years back, is we do interact a lot with the local governments as well as the corporate bodies, as well as, so we do see both ends of the spectrum, I must say. And coming to Gurudas' question, yes, there is definitely a disconnect between all of these. In fact, we have also, for some of our other issues also, we have seen that there is a disconnect between different departments in the corporation also. So it could be the building department has a disconnect with the sanitation department, has a disconnect with the water department, so on and so forth. Maybe this is something which even many people working here must have experienced this. So yeah, because of this disconnect, I would say that there is significant amount of knowledge which rests with them, but there is some lack of coordination. Because these departments don't talk to each other, there is very minimal data sharing also, or there is some data sharing only when there is a need. But this is, we have seen in the water sector, because we are trying to do some water action plans also for the Pune metropolitan region, and we have seen that different departments, let's take the example only of PMC for that matter, have a lot of data, but there is no crosstalk between the data. That means there is no crosstalk between the departments. And here we are talking about building fraternity with the corporation, with organizations who have been working in the groundwater space. To some extent, some of highlights which we received from the experts also who have been working, that there is a disconnect between the corporations and the government entities, or also between the NGO entities as well as the government entities as well as the corporations also, who are working in similar space. So could be groundwater for that matter. Maybe Aqua Dam, Bhujal must have been experiencing these things quite a bit. So of course, one possible reason which we as PKC have been trying to do for some amount of time is, whatever space it is, let's say groundwater where Gurudas is touching upon, and we see that there is a disconnect, there should be more of facilitation of crosstalk between these different entities. Could be on a common forum like what we are here, or something similar, because unless and until there is this crosstalk between citizens, between the building communities, between the corporations, between organizations per se who are dealing with groundwater, I think we'll still be stuck in the same space for time to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that, this becomes a huge impediment to organizations like Bhujal or Aqua Dam who want to work in the space of urban ecosystems, because if the administrators are not aware, if the governance mechanism is not aware of the problem, then it's not easy for you to knock the right doors and do the interconnected, interdisciplinary work which is there. So with that, I would like to come to Nakul. And so one is awareness within the administration. And I would want to extend my question about awareness to where you are coming from. You're coming from a CSR of a very large organization. So there are two questions actually for you. One is, do you see a lack of understanding within the agencies that you work with, the non-governmental organizations, the NGOs that you work with, in terms of the interconnectedness of groundwater and surface water? And the second part of the other question is, do you see that kind of awareness is already there within CSR community in the corporate world?
So I'll answer the second question.
Okay.
Although I may not have spent as much time in the CSR space, I think my early sense is there's very little work happening on urban ecology, and at least from that perspective. A lot of CSR organizations currently are focusing on, I was talking about this earlier, right? With almost a knee-jerk reaction, disasters that happen, and you end up, funding that. Of course, there are very gradual sort of advances in, say, early education. So those are the kind of avenues that are predominantly focused on. So ecology initiatives from Bangalore, for example, we have proximate. So one of the things that most CSR organizations also do is try and see whether they can do some good in their own communities where they're based.
Within their neighborhood,
and the mandate is very similar to Wipro Foundation as well. But it also has a sort of a third degree effect of not just with benefit for the ecology, but also try and understand how say a rejuvenation event or a program helps local communities sort of evolve better, try to have better access to natural resource availability, like water, for example. But you could see that in different perspectives. You could see it biodiversity, you could see that in climate adaptation, and so on. That being said, to answer the first question, not so much in Pune. I think I've seen a lot of, at least from the last couple of hours of conversations, I see a lot of interconnectedness between what people are doing on surface water, what people are doing on groundwater, and try and connect with each other from that angle. So there is a tightly knit, observable spectrum of connections here, and I'm honestly taking off my sort of professional hat when I say it. In other areas, and if I have to compare that to a city from where I am, Bangalore, I think there is understanding. Of course, there is a difference between the will of people to actually wanting to engage with the resource that they are using, but also there is change in geomorphology, the geology, and there's a lot of it really matters as to what resource you're dealing with and how that resource is made available to you. We are yet, for example, we are slowly beginning to understand or go in the same direction that, say, Aquadam has gone, to try and understand Bangalore's aquifers. How does the shallow aquifer system in Bangalore react? We are doing something similar. Another partner of ours, the Bangalore University, is doing something similar, engaging different interns from other colleges. So I think we are, in some sense, following Pune's footsteps to understand Bangalore's groundwater surfaces. And it's hard to say what else is happening, because with the Amrut 2.0 with the NIUA's work, it'll be very interesting to see what's going to happen in tier 2 cities. A lot of work that and as we saw this morning, a lot of these cities depend solely on groundwater. So it's that much more important for us to bring in whatever capacities that we have local, people who already know what kind of resource scarcity that they're dealing with, and try and build on that, try and see how we can best understand. And it's great that some of the people here are sort of helping towards that.
Yeah, thanks. I'll come back to you regarding Bangalore because I know you've worked a lot, and in his previous job you were at A-Tree, which has done seminal work in Bangalore in surface water as well as groundwater. But I'll come back to you. I just want to go back to Ashutosh and saying, um, let's say there is a breach in the dam which actually happened at Temgar in Pune. Right, a couple of years ago, you might recall that there was a fault, crack in the dam, and then there was not much water. Now, such a thing like that would be termed as a disaster by the media, right? But the depletion of a well can never be termed as a disaster. So, one of the things which United Nations is trying to do is make the invisible visible. They're trying to say that this is groundwater, it's invisible, but you have to make it visible at least in your minds. So what is it that we need get to know to be able to term these things? Depletion of a well or a spring not being there in next season, something like that. How do we get that into the books as a disaster, especially in the building communities and the construction and the architectural communities that you've been dealing for a very long time?
Okay, the last part is a tough part because dealing with construction community is a completely different ball game. They will understand their business completely well, but they will understand few other things because their business is very high stakes. Yeah. You already answered when you asked me this question. You already answered me this about the invisibility of groundwater. That's the most bugging thing. We are coming back to the same subject, but I think we have a bunch of people here who are super masters of their subjects, and they're probably trying to understand groundwater as what it could be. So they're trying to make it less abstract for them and make it more tangible for them. And there are those guys like Siddharth, for example. He made a better work than even Dr. Kulkarni, as he admitted. So some people are trying to understand how their subject, which is groundwater, is touching all those other areas. There is a funny thing about this. Groundwater is connected to surface water. That is the first thing that comes in the discourse. Whenever anyone discusses this, there is groundwater, there is surface water. Okay, the rivers. That is what the subject would start with. So there is a connection between groundwater and surface water. There is a connection between rainfall and groundwater. Because that's again very visible. Kitna barish hua hai? Every year, Pune's mayor would go to Khadakwasla. He would make a spectacle of it and he would declare that we have got all the dams full and we are going to be fine this year. And the reality is that it's the groundwater that is sustaining 45% of Pune's water. So, ये disconnect के साथ में there are more connections with groundwater which we don't realize. Like 2 days ago, Dhaval Joshi from Aquadam, he published a blog and he connected millets with groundwater. And the subject was about year of millets and groundwater. So when COVID came, I wrote a little bit on COVID and groundwater. You could connect groundwater to anything and everything because water is everywhere and 45% at least of water in Pune is groundwater. The connection is bound to be there. Yeah. So the whole point of groundwater is basically to get more people to understand it in those terms. I have some ideas about how to make this. This morning Sushma Date was asking her pet question. We have got Tekdis as recharge areas and we need to protect Tekdis and they're out to destroy them by building roads on that. Very valid question. I am completely on her side. And she asked how to protect them and is there a way to protect the recharge zones? And suddenly the discourse turned to we are protecting springs like Deshpande sir said. He said we are protecting the springs and he alluded to Patel sir. So the baat is ki on one side somebody is talking about protecting the recharge zone and the discourse suddenly shifts to protecting the discharge zone, which are in this case completely distinct geographical places, but we suddenly lose track, but we are still on the subject. So this thing is quite amiss. So once we were out for tea, I told Sushma कि ये होगा नहीं because recharge is an invisible phenomenon. When it discharges, it comes off as water. You get water to see, you put a gargoyle, you put a Nandi head or you do something ceremonious and then you celebrate the water coming out. When water is entering something, disappearing, how do you celebrate something that is disappearing? I think that is the whole tragedy of groundwater. And to that, I would add Dr. Punekar's suggestion about putting a stone in a field, दगड ठेवायचा त्याला शेंदूर लावायचा, celebrate it make the invisible visible, make a god out of it. I would say Vetal Tekdi is known by the name because Vetal is deemed to be a god. So I think we need to create a god-like narrative around groundwater. It may be a little beyond today's discourse on science, but we need something surreal, we need some miracle, we need something extra human to make it work for us. That's my thing. You already answered when you invisible and visible. We really don't have a clue how to do that, but we may probably find art people doing a fantastic job out of it. We may get murals who could sort of create, because these guys are experts at creating something visible. So they'll make invisible visible. Then we can have drama groups performing. Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Temples. Now, how you see it, I often think about it. When there is a tree coming in a road project, they will want to cut the tree, and the people who are now termed as environmentalists, like we all should be actually, but they say that these are the obstacle people because they don't allow us to remove the obstacles. Now the civil engineer who is working on the tree or who is working on the road will see that the tree roots are a problem. So what's a problem for him? It's something this other guy wants to preserve. So how do we sort this dichotomy? This is more true with groundwater because a tree root will still show up. It will still disrupt a pavement. It will still damage a road or a building here and there. But groundwater, come on, it's getting invisible. And unless it becomes invisible, it is not going to be important. If all the water that poured itself on a mountain top stayed there, we would not have mountains. It would be flattened out in the millions of years of geology. But the water is getting invisible. Because it gets invisible, I think it is making itself visible somewhere in the river stream. So these are challenges. And I just said what I feel about groundwater.
Yeah. No, I think you made very valid points. One is celebrating when it comes outside and, not caring a hoot when it is going inside. And that's typically what has happened for all these years. And we have never... So entire Mahabaleshwar, I think I remember just 2 weeks ago, we were discussing with the CEO of Mahabaleshwar, and she's a lady, and she was very worried that we are doing a lot to harvest rainwater, but it's not reflecting in Mahabaleshwar. I said, of course it will not reflect in Mahabaleshwar. It will reflect in Y, or maybe it will reflect in the low-lying areas. But she was not quite willing to take that because they are making the investments and spending, but somebody else is enjoying. And that's what happens when you're dealing with groundwater. So my question would be to Ashwini, and I know that PKC is trying to put a comprehensive management plan for Pune metropolitan region. So how are you going to deal with this situation where the groundwater as an awareness, and we in PMR we use a lot of groundwater, and Aquadam has the figures of how much water PMC consumes, which is not even metered and not even known in government circles. So while what is left out, discharged out of Khadakwasla is measured every day, but we have no means of tracking how much water we are consuming. So how do you intend to get this, or have you thought about it? How do you intend to get this into the water management plan swap which you have in mind?
So just maybe a few seconds on what we are trying to do here, what Gurudas mentioned of swap. It's basically a sustainable water action plan. Where it's going to be more like for participatory approach. So right now it's in a concept note stage, and we are talking to experts who are into this field that can we come up with such kind of an action plan for Pune metropolitan region, where the idea is you talk about surface water, groundwater, rainwater, sewage, water which is discharged from the dams as well as from the city, and because the city limits are expanding, the businesses are growing, the industrial community is growing, all sorts of things are happening. So we have certain data which is for availability, for usage and discharge, but the idea of swap or water action plan here is can we come up with some kind of a decision support or a response system for the local governments, so that whenever planning needs to be done, they take into consideration water as a perspective. So tomorrow if MIDCs need to be come up, then we know that MIDCs do pay for water or for groundwater. Where do you plan? So that's the whole idea of it. And we are engaging with Aquadam, CDSA, Gokhale Institute and other experts as well for this. So coming to what Gurudas mentioned, how to factor it. So the way we started was we conducted a very preliminary workshop few months back with Aquadam and CDSA in CDSA, and there we had a good representation from Zilla Parishad, PMC, PCMC, PMRDA, I must say. And the points which were discussed here were like, do you see any problems in the water space? So it was specifically for them where these challenges came up, like departments don't talk to each other, data is not being shared, so on and so forth. So there a very important thing was like, there is I must say, some limited understanding of groundwater. We had good representation from GSDA, the current director, and were also there. So they were there to talk about groundwater. But when you talk about specifically to these local governments, we could see that there is some limited understanding. But now with the groundwater cell coming up, of course, there are a lot of hopes because a lot of new data is being generated, so on and so forth. So yeah, there is a challenge when we'll be talking about swap, like how to take all of these things together, because everyone has their own forte. So people who are into surface water focus more on surface water. There are some disconnects with the groundwater as well, is what we have seen. But one thing I would also like to touch upon what Sir mentioned some time back. In the swap also, we are seeing it more as a participatory approach where citizens also play a very important role. So like when he mentioned that whatever is invisible is important, because if you start seeing water on the surface, then that's a problem. So what I also take from this is like, many times when we are talking about groundwater challenges, it's also a lot of citizen participation is important. Like now we have groups which are coming forward for saving the tekadis and saving the river, so on and so forth. But if we do more such things where citizens are empowered or they are acknowledged with what is groundwater, how it's to be done, because right now when there is a new building comes up, there is a rainwater harvesting system which is mandatory. But I see it in my building also, there is very limited understanding. No one knows that whether that rainwater is really recharging the bore which is there, or it is just going somewhere in the surface which you are just not able to see it. And you have this in your mind that okay, it is being recharged. Karan te kelela hai, so te hotach asil. So touching the swap, we also, and with respect to what Sir mentioned, I think citizen science also plays a very important role over here, where a lot of awareness and a crosstalk is created between them as well.
Yeah. I think that's quite important, that, how do you get the citizen participation whenever you're working on a sustainable water action plan? I want to come to Nakul, and you said that Bangalore has a lot to learn from Pune, but I think Pune has a lot to learn from Bangalore, especially from one aspect. And when we were discussing down during lunch, you said that you worked in ATRI, Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, for a long time. I know that you probably also worked with Sharad on the Arkavati River project, and Arkavati River in Bangalore has dried up, and there were some very stark findings which came out from that. So one is, I would want to know from to get our audience to know what is the relation that you saw between the surface water, the Arkavati River, and the groundwater. First question. Second is, Bangalore has a lot of surface water storage, which is lakes, and we would want to hear from you how you see the connection between the surface water and the groundwater, especially when you're talking about static water systems, not flowing. So one is flowing water, which is Arkavati, and the static water, which is the lakes of Bangalore.
Right. So one of the things that one often does is when you see a drying river, you have certain sort of hypotheses, right? That must be climate change, must be reduced rainfall, and so on. There are multiple reasons that something like that can happen. So when the Arkavati River, luckily for Bangalore, it emerges just outside of it, outside the jurisdiction, flows partly through it, and then goes away and joins the Kaveri later, right? So Arkavati was drying from the 70s till about, it's still dry. And one of the early sort of hypotheses that we sort of came up with is must be reduced rainfall. Mm-hmm. The number of rain gauges were checked the last 40 odd years, no change in rainfall, right? So a lot of work that happens upstream, the land use change was then observed. We looked at farmer practices. We looked at irrigation practices. What are the ways in which people procured water for farming? And a lot of it, in the initial years, people were growing vegetables, which fed the city. And there was a slow transformation also because the city grew and a lot of people were drawn towards the city. So I think close to now, and that percentage has increased, close to about 20% of land area, which is the catchment of the Arkavati, called the TG Halli Reservoir. There's one reservoir on the Arkavati, is now converted to eucalyptus plantations. It's an easy sort of tree to grow and easy money too, right? So, and on top of that, and people needed immediate groundwater. And so what they did was drilled bore wells, a lot of check dams were built and so on and so forth. So a lot of base flows were cut off. So one of the things that we concluded was there are issues upstream that have been contributing very gradually to lead to what the river is looking right now, right? And but in the last 3 years, there's been so much rain. I think close to about 20% more rains each year. That some of those dry reservoirs also have filled up. Now people are talking about plenty. We don't know how that may change people's use and practices, agricultural practices, but that's the case right now. And I'm imagining that to be like a blown up version of what issues you may have faced with your well and your neighbor. But if Arkavati would have flowed right through the city, and if we had some amount of dependence in terms of groundwater recharge and so on, because the rains that fall in the upstream areas, we would have a real sort of conflict in our hands. Luckily, that has not happened. The brunt of it is essentially flows have reduced, right? And adding to another case that Siddharth had showed in one of his last slides, with all the upstream downstream troubles that people have had. So that's the kind of perspective that we brought when we started understanding the rivers. Sorry, what was your second question?
My second question was the lakes of Bangalore.
Right. So the lakes of Bangalore, right. That's so the lakes almost entirely fed the city of Bangalore for the longest time, right? And of course there were wells, but some of the wells were around lakes which people would find safe for drinking. So domestic use was from the lake. A lot of lakes were used as for agricultural purposes. And it's interesting how a transformation of lake governance has changed over the years, and how people perceive what a lake should be. Most of it, if not all, and you can see that from the core to the periphery of the city, the governance of lakes has, of course, is in the hands of the municipal corporation. It's called the BBMP in the case of Bangalore. But also they honestly didn't have the capacities to develop it. They had a single model. If there's less water, you dredge it up, remove all of it, make some islands, get the birds in, have more water, and that's great if you are tackling floods. And in certain areas, it's useful in Bangalore. And another important feature about lakes is the interconnectedness, right? So there are 3 valleys in Bangalore, and water drains out as it falls, and each valley has a series of lakes, and all of them are connected by a certain system, what we call a Raja Kaluve, which a Kaluve is essentially a way for water to go. And these depend on the size. If it's a large lake connecting to a bunch of smaller lakes, there are smaller pathways for the water to get there. And Bangalore has had a lot of sort of issues with development in the last 30 odd years. So a number of encroachments happened over these waterways. That cause flooding, that cause drying up of lakes, and so on. So those were the kind of issues that Bangalore faced. The connection between lakes and groundwater is not widely understood, I fail to recall any study that people may have done specifically trying to understand, if this particular lake is rejuvenated, my borewell started functioning again. Yes, we have anecdotal evidence of borewell functioning.
I think there have been some instances where the lakes and the wells and the bore wells have been having water travel back and forth between them in Bangalore.
That's right.
Some studies have been done, and over seasons they have noticed that some wells have been charging lakes at a high time, and when the lakes have water, they have been charging the wells back.
Right.
This is a Bangalore study.
Correct.
They have done some studies.
Right. So the complexity of the aquifer surrounding a lake is slowly beginning to unravel itself, right? And we will need more organizations like Biome, for example, is doing fantastic work in the areas where it was recently in the news, where it flooded quite a bit. So those are the spaces where we probably need to have a much better, finer understanding of the relationship between lakes and
Exactly.
And yes, there are certain spaces where we know. Jakur Lake in the north of Bangalore.
I think this was with Jakur.
So Jakur Lake in the north of Bangalore is a model for lake rejuvenation and its connections between how one can build an STP, build a wetland, get the water, get all the sewage to be treated at the STP, run it through the wetland, and then there's that back and forth between the lake and the well. But has that happened in different lakes? Nobody knows. It's we really need to figure that system out.
I think I wanted to interject when you were talking about the Rajakaluways and the canals that connect the ponds or the lakes with other water bodies. So until you came to your last point, the message was rather like the surface water stays as surface water. It has to be transferred from one surface water body to another surface water body through something like a physical canal. And this is that part of the aquifer which is lost on people's understanding. That an aquifer is a live thing, that it can take its charge from one place and get a discharge into another. Get some other water body to get filled up. So for all the nice presentations Siddharth and Viraj have made in the morning, I think a large part of the message that further needs to be bolstered, strengthened, is that aquifer is a live body. Like we have a Jeevitnadi, we should have a what do you call it?
Bhujal.
Jaladhar, yeah. We should have a Jeevit Jaladhar sort of a thing. Because we need to have people know that for the moment that they are talking about a recharge happening at the hilltop and the water flowing into the river, people do understand that there is a recharge area and a geographically separated discharge area.
Yeah. So with that, I would like to come to some action points now, and before we kind of close. Like Nakul, you mentioned that the relation between surface water and groundwater is not well understood. The relation between groundwater and flooding is also not well understood. Percolation can remove the stress of flooding in cities, and we have seen that in Bangalore this year. Was it this year? Yeah, last year, okay. We have seen it in Pune in 2019, where the Ambiloda flooded and Ram Nadi flooded. And we know what happens when there's an urban sprawl, right? The first thing the builders do is they flatten out that piece of land. And once you flatten out that piece of land, the natural drainage patterns are going to change. The water which is falling, the precipitation which is falling in that area is no longer going to drain out to the lowest point in the landscape, which is supposed to be the river. And once you flatten, in urban sprawl, the first thing you do is flatten. So my question to you is, Ashutosh, through Punarbharan, if I were to ask you what are 2 or 3 action points which are needed to bring forth this issue of flooding and groundwater and surface water to urban planners, urban development authorities, what are the 2 or 3 action points that you want to say? And I'll come to the others also on your action points.
Yeah, I may have said this before and I may be sort of repeating the same thing.
No, please do repeat.
But the construction industry and the administrative setup around that is a really hard nut to crack. They're made of M40 concrete. So it's very hard to crush them. So I think the primary thing to get a change is for them to understand, which is messaging. मला ऐकायचं नसेल तर मला ऐकू येणार नाही. That's also a phenomenon. We don't want to listen because the stakes are very high. The land prices have crossed the skies. So it's very hard for the message to really go out to people who need to accept it. They probably, who need to listen to it, who need to follow. They probably hear it, but they've got 2 years. So the message doesn't sink in. The other side, I feel, while this messaging thing is going to take its time, I feel that there is a demand management which we really don't want to talk about everywhere. And at Punarbharan, we do a little bit of demand management in a very, very small, minuscule kind of a way. We just get some of our friends together, we go to societies and we ask them to put aerators on their taps. And when we put aerators on their taps, we are serving them twofold. One is they are saving the water, number one, that's the primary thing, because 18 liters per minute and 3 liters per minute is a huge saving per minute. And so it translates into literally millions of liters per building, often per week or per day. The second thing that they save is the power to lift that water up. And the third thing that they save is the water going to the sewage system. So this is actually a threefold advantage, and we should be bringing this into the main discourse. We are not demand management. I think that we are given 135 liters now. We are talking 150 LPCD. I think that we can manage at 60-65 LPCD even with the present sewerage system. But we have not dwelt upon the architectural interventions that must take place. For example, we have got a grey water inside our households, which could be routed to different chambers, which could be treated in a different way, and it could be reused. So far, we have not discussed anything about reuse. When we talk about reuse, like the Jakur Lake thing, they use the lakes to drain the STP water into that. So the STP has cleaned the water to a certain extent. They are allowing maybe the phytoremediation or the natural means to take over and do the rest of the job, and then feed that water as groundwater to the rest of the aquifer in the urban area. This message has got to percolate at least among the administration, so that people will be able to take care of their water within their premises. When people take care of one well in their premises, they will also take care of their wastewater within their premises. If you have got one well to guard in your compound, you will see that no wastewater enters into it, no sewage, no septic tank water enters into it. So I think these are the things needed.
I think all the 3-4 points which you made are extremely valid. And one of the things which I would just like to add to what Ashutosh just said is what we are using 165 liters per day. 135, but yeah, plus if we draw the groundwater, then it's going to be more. The
Sorry, that's not the water we are using. That's the water we are defined to be using.
We are actually using over 200.
We are using more than 250.
Yeah, more than 200 liters, but defined. So one of the things is, if you look at the consumptive water use, it's just about 5 to 10 liters per head. Right? So out of 200 liters, if you minus 10 liters, 190 liters is going back as sewage. And that's the reason why Ashutosh's point is very valid, that how can you make use of that grey water? All of that, obviously some of it is black water, which is not going to go back, but it needs to be treated differently. But yeah, I think these are all 3 valid points about messaging, about demand management. And traditional water management was all about demand management. They were well within the limits of what nature provided to them, right? The precipitation. So that is one. Coming to Ashwini, I think what are the couple of action points that you see when you're going to prepare the sustainable water action plan? What is it that you think you would need to tell the policy makers to integrate into local administration?
So like the demand side was touched upon in the swap, we are also discussing or talking about the supply side over here. So we know that it's the dams which is supplying the water, but I had a very interesting conversation once with Himanshu in PKC office, and he said that there should be a mechanism to also note how much water is there within the city, because there's no way of the way we measure it. What we measure or is known is what comes out from the dam and what goes out from the city. But how much pouring happens within the city, how much water is there within the city is also something to be checked. Coming to the point or the action points and how we plan to go ahead with the swap. So the demand and the supply both need to be looked at. Second is some of the things which we are trying to discuss with the local government, because this water action plan is for the local government, because they are the key decision makers when it comes to it, is there should be some kind of mechanism for them to continuously monitor what changes are happening. So we are not just proposing a dashboard, but a decision response system over here, where all these layers, could be forest, could be water layers, could be groundwater, all are on one platform, because one is connected to another. So forest layers are connected to groundwater, are connected to the surface water, so on and so forth. So you need an integration of all of this data on one place. That's a very key important thing, and that should be maintained, because it's known that dashboards come up, but that nobody maintains it for number of reasons, and they just die their natural death. So this is what we are trying to see, that can we put it into their system as a decision support system or a response system. So it goes in their system and it's not someone else who is telling them that you should be doing it. And one action point which we also came out during our workshop, which we did at CDS, is there should be a component of planning in all of these places. So there should be an urban planner who should be integrated into these systems. I don't know the current state, whether there is a planner integrated into these systems or not. Apparently, Anita ma'am is saying no. So, but this kind of person or this kind of maybe a small department needs to come into place, because I'm sure they all are doing it at some point or the other. But yeah, so
maybe your idea of having a water cell.
Yeah, so we are also trying to propose that at a highest authority, which is the divisional commissioner levels office, can we have a water cell? So this whole response system gets integrated into the office of this water cell. And why divisional commissioner's office? Because that comes out to be the highest authority over the corporations also.
Yeah, thank you, Ashwini. I think, again, very valid points, all the 3 points which you made. One of the things when we were at the GSDA last time is we were talking to them. So GSDA, the Groundwater Survey Authority, which is a Maharashtra state government, they're responsible if an aquifer goes empty, right? They are responsible for everything which happens below the ground, but they have got absolutely zero authority about what happens above the ground. And what happens above the ground actually dictates what happens below the ground. So there is no connection between urban development, urban planning, like Anita said, and GSDA. So how do you integrate that? And I think PKC has a defined role in that. Is how do you integrate all of that through the water cell? I want to come to you, Nakul, and you've now switched over your into a corporate social responsibility kind of a role. What are the couple of action points you see? And one of the things which I would like to say is we've been studying CSR reports of the 100 top companies in India who are working on CSR for the last couple of years. We've been doing the study for the last 4 years. And we have seen an abysmal contribution of CSR funding to Schedule 7.E, which is environment and sustainability. Less than 1% of the CSR money is actually going into that. And from that 1%, most of it is going towards energy saving, that is LED lamps and solar lamps. So it's not actually has got nothing to do with sustainability, but it's a kind of a feel-good factor that, yeah, we are giving these villages solar lamps and high mast we have converted, so on and so forth. So what are the couple of action points, Nakul, which you suggest that that needs to be happen within CSR managers on one side and within NGOs and the agencies which are going to operate with the money which the CSR funds give?
So because I'm a new entrant into this space, I think it'll be useful for me to also brainstorm a little bit about how this can happen, right? And one of the ways in which I think that this can happen is a better integration or an overlap, trying to understand an overlap between what is the CSR mandate, what does the Act tell us, and how do these overlap over say the biodiversity goals, say the SDGs, and some of the smaller, finer details of what the SDGs have to tell us, right? So that's one way that I think we can better understand and try and contribute towards ecology, environment, and sustainability initiatives. And that said, with the kind of work that Wipro Foundation has been doing, we spread across now last year in 4 cities. We're going to start off likely in a couple of others, and our predominant let's just take the idea of groundwater, right? The issues around groundwater. My sense is if we observe the issues around urban groundwater as an issue of equity, as an issue of justice, as an issue of rights over a certain resource, how do those rights get distributed equitably, the kind of action points sort of spell themselves out. We will still have to make an effort to start connecting with organizations that engage with these normative values, and I think it's important to have them right off the bat in the beginning and say them out aloud to be able to try and actually affect something on ground. And that's the thing that I was talking to Dr. with you about. And how do you layer, let's say in Pune, how do you layer rich aquifer, poor aquifer? There are spaces where you don't need groundwater. I mean, you don't need it. It's more than enough. Water is flowing out and it's getting wasted. Water positive, right? And how do you layer that over, say, the wards? And within those wards, how do you layer that over, who has access to these resources and who does not? And how can organizations or individuals sitting here help the PMC realize that and see what actions can they take? So I think there is the solutions are there, but the approach is important. It's what vehicle you ride on to get there.
Just a little bit about, I don't know how CSR works. I do know a little, but I don't know how they, what drives them basically. Yeah, what drives them basically. Why do so many organizations go for LED lamps? If we found the reason, then we probably could motivate them to undertake these programs. What is it that drives? Because you are talking of your organization. Now, Wipro Foundation, for what I know, have done exemplary work in this domain, particularly with the biome, with aquadam, and we are aware of that. But why doesn't some other CSR manager or a CSR person follow them? Is there a way for organizations like yours to transmit what you have learned from? Because you've also learned along the way. And there are things that you could actually give it out to those other CSR guys. Is there a way? I mean, I'm not sure if there is. If there exists any, then that medium should be used, because this is a grave challenge we all are facing and we need to move beyond the LED lamps.
So one of the suggestions which is coming up is, can you make use cases about your examples in this?
Right. So this is a great opportunity to also tell people of a new website that we're trying to come up with. It's called Urban Waters, and these cover all the work that all of our partners have done in the area of water in different cities, right? So Bangalore, Pune, Hyderabad, and Chennai. As of now, we'll probably add more cities. There are use cases there. There are
excellent.
There are the wins and the losses, what people have learned over the course of the last 10 years of work that Urban Waters initiative has done. So that website is going to come up soon. We have a list shared by Aquadam with us, a mailing list we will be sending out, and I hope most of your email addresses are with them.
Great. I think this is going to be a wonderful site. But I just hope there's going to be peer learning. We are very shy of peer learning, So that's one thing which I think we've had a great session. So we at the end of this discussion, I would really like to thank the panel for their contribution in this discussion. Also, there are very clear action points which have come out from the discussion, and I've made a note of them. I would want Ravindra and his team to, take more points from them, add to this, and circulate this as a short note as an output of this discussion. That will be the main thing if there's any contribution that, right? So I have noted down all these points, action points which they have said. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope the audience has also enjoyed it.